I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where everybody keeps their lawns trimmed and waves politely when you pass by. For the most part, it's peaceful and almost boring, but there's just one neighbor, Mr. Henderson, who lives across the street. He's an older guy who keeps to himself. At first, I didn't pay much attention, but then I started noticing his routine. It's precise. Every morning at 7:15, he walks to his mailbox, not a minute earlier, not a minute later. He retrieves his mail, nods to anybody who happens to be outside, and goes back inside. Then, every evening at 9 sharp, he turns on his porch light, and at 9:17, he turns it off. Not 9:16, not 9:18, always 9:17. It's those little details that start to get to me. The sheer rigidity of his schedule. It's like he's operating on some kind of internal clock or like he's being controlled. One day, I was working from home and I happened to glance out the window. It was around 2 in the afternoon and Mr. Henderson was outside in his backyard. He was just standing there, perfectly still, facing his house. I watched him for a few minutes, but he didn't move. It was so unsettling, like he was frozen in time or something. Then, just as suddenly, he turned and went back inside. That night, I couldn't shake that feeling that something was off. I kept looking out my window watching his house. At 9, his porch light came on, and at 9:17, it went off. Within a few minutes later, it came back on, and then off again, and then on. It was flickering erratically. I felt a surge of adrenaline. Something was wrong. I grabbed my phone and went outside. As I crossed the street, I could hear a faint sound coming from his house, a rhythmic tapping almost. I approached his front door, and the tapping got louder. I peered through his window, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Mr. Henderson was sitting in his living room, facing the window. He was completely still except for his right hand, which was tapping repetitively on the armrest. His eyes were wide open, staring straight ahead, but they looked empty, almost lifeless. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to call the police, but I hesitated. What could I even tell them? That my neighbor was acting weird? I went back home, locked my doors, and closed my blinds. I didn't sleep that night. The tapping sound, the image of his empty eyes, it was burned into my mind. The next morning, Mr. Henderson was outside, retrieving his mail right on schedule. He nodded to me as if nothing had happened, and since then, his routine has been perfect. Every day, every minute, the same. And that's what scares me the most, the return to normalcy. I never really believed in paranormal stuff, but then I started having my doubts after this experience. It took place a couple years back with me and my friend, let's call him Robert. We would frequently visit the park. It was summer break. It was summer break, and we would usually go hang out and then go for snacks at the gas station, come back, hang out some more, and then go home and play some Apex Legends. It became sort of a routine for us. One day, we decided to have our usual routine, but we had forgot to bring our money, so we decided to each go back to our houses, grab money, and meet up at my place since we only lived about 3 neighborhoods apart. As I arrived at my house, I see Robert at a distance sprinting out of breath, screaming, "Run!" He's following me as he's pointing in my direction. I'm completely confused because there's nobody behind him. I tell him to calm down and to tell me what's going on. He starts explaining that as he was walking to my house, he heard a footstep behind him. He turned around to be faced with a fully black figure. It looked like a tall man wearing full black, but the weirdest part was his face was completely blacked out. Robert said that they had sort of a face-off, with Robert telling him what he wanted, when suddenly the figure begins to sprint full speed at him. Robert, being in track at the time, was pretty fast and had some good stamina. Thank God his flight reaction kicked in and began bolting in the opposite direction. He said he could hear the footsteps behind him getting closer, taking peeks behind him once in a while. He could see the figure catching up. He then turned on my neighborhood and saw me and started screaming. To this day, we like to talk about that experience. I keep asking if he was trying to pull a prank on me, but he keeps saying he wasn't lying and he has no clue what that was. It's pretty scary to think that what could have happened that day if the figure had caught up to him. I was around 18 or 19 and was sleeping at my girlfriend's at the time's place. Her mom, and her mom's boyfriend had all gone somewhere that night, so I was alone with her mom's dog and trying to go to sleep. I'd gone to her bed while the dog was left out in the living room. A few minutes after I'd laid down, I heard the dog back door crash open violently and heavy footsteps walk through the kitchen. The dog started going crazy. I heard cabinets being thrown open and drawers being run through. My first thought was it was a break in. Finally, the rummaging stopped and footsteps started coming up the hallway towards the bedrooms. I assumed whoever it was had a knife and things might get violent, so I was trying to stay as quiet as possible. But then the footsteps stopped outside the mother's bedroom's door. The door opened and the footsteps were inside. Then the door closed and there was nothing. Only problem was the mother was extremely paranoid and had an outside door style deadbolt in her bedroom door, and she kept it locked when she wasn't home. There was only one key that I knew of, but the door hadn't even been unlocked. Whoever it was just opened it as it was and went in. The place didn't have an attic or a basement, but was elevated a few feet off the ground, so every little step and movement was like a drum. This room was immediately adjacent to mine. Whoever this was opened a dead-bolted door without unlocking it, stepped only just inside the room, closed the door behind, and just stopped in completely silent. No flicking on the lights or going over to sit on the bed or rummaging around in there, or even adjusting their weights and otherwise moving around. It was just complete silence for the rest of the night. Then, sometime close to dawn, the door opened again and the footsteps went back down to the hall and out the back door. I finally got up to look at the damage. Mother's bedroom door was still locked, kitchen was spotless, back door was closed, and showed no sign of forced entry. I asked them about it when they got home, and apparently nothing like this had ever happened to any of them before, because they had no clue what I was talking about and were looking at me like they were expecting this to be some kind of prank or so. To this day, I still have no answer. Last owners before her mom were her grandparents, and I don't think there were any properties on that entire road before the 1900s, so who knows. Another less scary one happened later in that house where I was trying to go to the bed and felt a cat nuzzle up against my leg. They didn't at the time have a cat, but they used to, and it was light enough that I could clearly see that there was nothing there. It came up to me the way a cat would, with the weight adjustment, lobbed down, and the feeling of something being physically there just slowly faded away over a minute or so. That time, when I told her about it, she just smiled. I guess she was glad that at least one of her old cats was still hanging around. Everything here started one day in the summer. I'm in southern Maine, so there's a lot of ATV trails out here. Me and my father often went out riding in them. At the time, I was only 6, so I was on the back of my dad's four-wheeler. It was somewhere around mid-fall or early spring, so you could see far into the woods at this point. We went out on our 2016 Honda Rancher, which at the time was a small size. I had no problem sitting on the back of the four-wheeler. We were on our way to the river, so we took the ATV/dirt road combo type of trail. This road is used by cars sometimes, but legally is an ATV trail. We were cruising along at this point, going something like 30 miles an hour. I was enjoying the breeze of the day, as it was pretty warm. As we rode, I liked to look over my father's shoulder and see where we were going. Just then, I felt the four-wheeler slow down as if my dad had let off the gas. Because my dad refused to wear helmets on these small rides, I heard him say, "What the hell?" Naturally, this made me want to look ahead to see what he was looking at. When I did, I saw a man on a dirt bike riding across the road. But what both me and my dad immediately noticed was he was slightly transparent. And then as he went across, making no noise, he got more and more transparent until he was right in front of us. He immediately disappeared. We looked over to investigate, and there was no trail where he seemed to be. As I said earlier, we could see deeply into the woods, but still nothing. To make this even weirder, he appears to be on either a KTM 250 or a 450. So the fact that we couldn't hear him on our very quiet utility quad only makes this even weirder. Me and my dad, to this day, can both agree on what we saw. Transparent, silent, and disappeared. Simple as that.